Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first and third virtual programmatic day. I'm Clementina Piazza. I'm programmatic director for EMEA for Integral Ad Science, and I'm gonna be taking over the host duties from Simon Halstead, who has brilliantly moderated our previous two virtual programmatic days. First one last October 2017, and the last one last April. First of all, thanks to all the panelists for making the time, and thank you for all of you on the line for taking the time to connect with us today. As IAB Europe Programmatic Trading Committee, I think we do a big amount of work and pan-European initiatives aimed at supporting publishers, agencies, advertisers in their knowledge and understanding of the programmatic ecosystem and its impact on digital advertising. And we hope really that today's event will be a very good example of that. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. So all you as participants are on mute. There is a Q&A box that you're very welcome to use. If we have time at the end, we're gonna proceed with some Q&A. If we don't have time, please do file your questions and we'll make sure to address them at a later stage with some follow-up notes. If we move on to today's agenda, I'm very, very excited about the content of today. So we're gonna start off with Daniel Knapp, who's gonna run us through the much anticipated European programmatic market sizing research, which we're gonna then be commenting with his help and some other esteemed panelists. We're gonna then move on to David Goddard, which is gonna run us through the core findings of another pivotal piece of research, which is the new attitudes to programmatic advertising, which is also gonna be followed by a panel discussion. We'll then proceed with Oliver Gertz, who's gonna give us an insightful update into the state of transparency and trust in digital advertising. And we will conclude today's event with a special guest, which is Lindsay Roundtree, Head of Content at ExchangeWire, who is going to be joined by a group of esteemed panelists once again in giving us an overview of where the programmatic advertising ecosystem is 6 months after GDPR. So without further ado, Daniel, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and good morning, everyone. Excited to be here and to share with you the results of our programmatic market sizing research. And as you know, every year, myself as Artist Market and IAB Europe, in collaboration with all the local IABs in Europe, size the market to put a pulse on growth trends. And we expanded from sizing the overall market to also looking in detail at what is actually happening in the programmatic world, a key growth driver. We all know that it's not just formats like video that drive the market, but it's also innovations in data and transaction mechanisms. So I would like to share with you our results to enable you to get an understanding of what is the size, what's the state of the market, and what are the kind of sectoral dynamics that we are seeing. Defining programmatic is always a hard task in itself. I think if you look at vendor websites, what a certain vendor defines as programmatic varies, and it also varies between countries. So here we see kind of an overview on this slide of what we see as programmatic. We take into account very different transaction mechanisms, real-time RTB-based and non-RTB-based transaction mechanisms to kind of really have a holistic picture of programmatic. We're also not just focusing on programmatic going via the 20%, kind of the open independent market, but we're also including the spend going through large platforms such as Facebook and Google on their own properties and of course via third parties as programmatic. Next slide, please. To size the market, we looked at actually 27 different markets. These are all the markets that are also contributing to our IAB ADEX study. So the numbers that you see can be directly compared to the annual studies that we put out on the overall market. You see a couple of blank spots here, but in Europe, so it's important to understand Europe for us is not just the EU. It's a geographical definition. And we cover with this around, I'd say around 97–98% of the total market depicted on this map, including the gray areas. Next slide. The European programmatic ad market, this is ad spend and programmatic from a publisher perspective, has reached 12 billion euros. That is, since we started measurement in 2013, a fourfold increase with double-digit or even triple-digit growth rates all along. So programmatic has been one of the major growth stories fueling the market, and we've seen budget migrations from IO-based campaigns to programmatic to reach these 12 billion. Next slide. This growth really has been quite impressive, and we see, despite the now emerging maturity of the digital ad market, programmatic still growing strong. So programmatic is growing as strong as video, growing as strong as mobile, and despite this maturity, it is still a double-digit growth rate, and we foresee this to continue over the next 2 years with 20% year-on-year in 2018 and around again 20% in 2019. To put this in context, I said it's a 12 billion euro market. If we compare this to overall display spend in Europe, it comprises everything from banners, rich media, and videos, we can see that the market is now programmatic first. We had the tipping point in 2016 when spend transacted programmatically for the first time exceeded IO-based campaigns. And we are rapidly approaching a state where 2/3 of the market are being transacted programmatically. This trend again is going to continue. We're likely going to see in excess of 70% transacted programmatically in 2018, going up to around 80–85% by 2019. The IO will not go away entirely, but the predominant part of ad inventory will be traded programmatically. As I said before, programmatic is an umbrella term, and it really helps to understand, if you want to go into the dynamics of programmatic, how that market itself is changing. It's not just growing, but it's also changing structurally. We had, when we started, a stronger part of the programmatic market going programmatic indirect, going via open exchanges, non-guaranteed inventory, and so forth. And again, we've seen 2016 again was the turning point where programmatic direct channels, that also includes Facebook, really overtook programmatic indirect. And again, we see this trend continuing. Behind this is also, of course, the growth of private marketplaces, of premium inventory being put in those marketplaces, in particular in the video domain. We see some of the biggest traction in programmatic in video. So this move to programmatic direct channels is going to continue. And it's also an expression of advertiser, publisher, and intermediary interest in curbing fraud and any other kind of endemic issues in the value chain through programmatic direct. I mentioned video, and indeed, video has been a main driver of digital ad spend in Europe overall, and this is also continuing in programmatic, where we can see actually a vast majority of video spend is already going programmatically, nearing 4 billion out of this, nearing 4 billion out of this market, growing incredibly strongly on all sides. Premium video from broadcasters who are opening up to putting more on private marketplaces, the explosion of video in social, and also the explosion of video in the long tail, as there's a clear move towards also using data and targeting for branding campaigns, not just direct response and performance, which was the version 1 of programmatic when it started to come into the market. And indeed, if we look at it from a different perspective, overall programmatic spend, so not just within video, but saying of total programmatic spend now, 1/3 is video. And that's quite interesting because if you look at the overall digital ad market, video actually has a lower share than a third. So video is really overrepresented in programmatic, and thus video programmatic is a key driver of the overall programmatic and the overall market in Europe as well. And the terms video and programmatic are becoming completely intertwined. It's a 4 billion market now, and if we look, if we compare programmatic video to programmatic banner advertising, we can see completely different growth rates. It's growing 4.5 times faster than banner. And if you look at the right side, you can clearly see this trajectory. Again, 2016 was a major year where we saw a return to very high triple-digit growth in video programmatic, and it's really going to continue to outperform banner in the years to come, remaining at double-digit growth rates for the next 2 years, which we're forecasting as well, probably at around a 50% growth rate in 2018 and 37% in 2019. Also in mobile, clearly, of course, driven by the platforms as well, we see programmatic dominating out of the overall mobile display ad market. Programmatic is taking the lion's share, and we're rapidly entering a near full programmatic mobile market. And mobile is so dominant, of course. We now just released H1 figures for 2018, where over half of all spend, digital ad spend, is mobile. And again, we see mobile overrepresented slightly in programmatic, where nearing 60% of programmatic spend is mobile. Just compare that to, if you compare that to 2013, it has been a massive leap forward. And you can clearly see this again. This nearly 7 billion market is completely powering overall growth, even including programmatic. The desktop market is broadly flattish. If we factored out programmatic, the desktop market would be, depending on the national market, in single or even double-digit decline. If we just looked at, let's say, desktop IO campaigns. So even programmatic is barely lifting desktop above, into growth territory, and it is really mobile that is fueling this overall ecosystem with programmatic. There are, of course, clear differences between Western and Eastern Europe. We've seen traditionally markets like Netherlands, the UK, France, and the Nordics as early adopters, as markets that are tech-savvy, as markets in the Netherlands that are very prone to experimentation, that have been performance-based historically. The UK, of course, has a very large, very innovative digital ad market that's 2.4 times bigger than the next biggest one. Germany as the first stop also for US companies. The Nordics is, again, experimentation-friendly markets. But overall, we see a leapfrogging of second-tier markets. We see now stronger traction in Germany, a market that has been historically conservative around programmatic, and we're seeing massive leaps in Eastern Europe as well, mainly driven by Poland in terms of maturity and by Russia in terms of volume. Overall, there is, of course, a clear dominance in Western Europe just because of the maturity and the size of the markets. But you can clearly see that the growth trajectory in CEE, in Central and Eastern Europe, is actually on the up, and we see now this clear indication of a second mover market or second mover region. We see the gap to Western Europe closing and growth rates actually accelerating while they are slightly decelerating in Western Europe. And that just as a quick primer to inform you on the actual state of programmatic spend in Europe. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Clementina to dive into the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'm very, very happy to be joined today by such an esteemed group of people to comment a little bit on the findings that Daniel just outlined. So again, without further ado, I would really like for our panelists to introduce themselves. If we can start by, Daniel, you've already kind of introduced yourself, but if you can start with James, continuing with Joanna, guys, over to you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is James Prudhomme. I'm the head of international for Index Exchange, based out of our London office.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joanna Burton, delighted to be here. I work across Europe for SpotX, which is a video advertising monetization platform.
Hi, everyone. I'm Simon Halstead. I hold the longest title on this committee, both as chair of the IAB Programmatic Trading Committee and then head of open demand for international at Oath, a Verizon company.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Krumperman. I work at Schibsted Marketplaces. That's our classifieds division or marketplaces division. And my job is to work with all of the sites across the different countries we're in, helping the different sites monetize their inventory and advertising business.
Thank you. So I would like, first question kind of comes to mind. So we've seen clearly one of the main points of Daniel's outline is that programmatic continues to command more and more of digital ad budgets. And my first question is, where is that we should be looking at other potential areas for growth, and what those areas of growth could be? And I'm actually gonna go back to you, Daniel. If you want to take this one, it would be great.
Absolutely. I mean, the study aggregates a lot into different formats, display and video, but there are other pockets of growth in other formats. For instance, in audio, we see strong demand for programmatic audio inventory, both supplied by streaming platforms and actually also by traditional radio stations, radio broadcasters across Europe. Ultimately, I think we will see the programmatization of everything. It's of course something that started in digital, but when it comes to, say, smarter buying, data-driven buying of audiences and of inventory, you can also do that in traditional media. In print, for instance, you do it in out of home, in particular now in digital out of home. And there has, of course, been a lot of buzz around programmatic TV or addressable TV. Again, an area that is, I think, plagued with a lot of definition confusion, because many different vendors and industry participants define what is addressable TV and what is programmatic TV very, very differently. But the broad story is the same, that the principles established by programmatic to make the buying and selling easier and to provide additional data and targeting and reporting criteria is making its way ultimately in all other media and isn't stopping at the big screen in the living room. I think when it comes to growth looking forward, on top of formats, growth needs to come from cleaning up the ecosystem, cleaning up the supply chain. The industry was globally plagued by supply chain intransparency, and many initiatives driven by advertisers, driven by industry bodies, by publishers, have contributed to cleaning up the supply chain, and this work continues. So it's important that the buzz and the potential of programmatic is being supported by a healthy, clean, and accountable ecosystem, which on top of the format expansion is vital for the long-term success of programmatic for all market participants.
Thank you, Daniel. On the video point, I would actually like Joanna's help to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what the key driver of growth are for video, and how those video advertising strategies are actually evolving. Joanna, if you could help me kind of expand on that, that would be great.
Sure. So the data certainly shows impressive growth, with a third of all programmatic spend in 2017 being video. Partly this is because video commands higher prices, higher CPMs. But there have been several reasons I could see why there's an increase in programmatic video advertising across Europe. One of them is because broadcasters are now taking a more strategic approach to programmatic advertising and making their video inventory available for programmatic buying. Many of them have been through a strategic review of the opportunity and are now really in full-blown execution mode, ramping up. In some cases, they are still limited to 1 or 2 DSPs, and to Daniel's point earlier, it's very often very much in a private marketplace or what you might call programmatic direct position. But in some cases, this has led to the emergence of new businesses that have grown up over the period of time that Daniel was talking about. So, for example, Iunia in Spain is a combination of the video inventory from Atresmedia and Mediaset. So a new innovation there. We've also seen the rise of video-first companies such as Duke in Media, which you'll probably all know. It creates Fail Army and the Pet Collective and other video viewing opportunities. There's also companies like Joe Media who are producing more and more video. Because people want this sight, sound and motion. It appeals to the viewers and also the advertisers who want to reach them with the higher production values. And then in addition, there have been sort of more traditional publishers who really seized the opportunity of video advertising and the higher rates it commands and are really benefiting from that. So as an example, Mail Online, a global publisher, a really smart publisher coming from a more traditional background, but they have a huge amount of video content, and with that comes a huge amount of video advertising. This works very well for them. Or Global, it's a media company which owns many assets, including radio stations such as Heart and Capital Radio, and they have a lot of video advertising. And then what we're also seeing is companies emerging to help publishers and advertisers take advantage of this trend. For example, there's a new company called Wibbits, which can create additional videos for companies. There's Suggestive in Europe, and also Vember, which is a company we invested in, which creates a syndicated video advertising marketplace. So you can have video advertising and video content from a complementary publisher. So if you're a publisher with no video, they can provide video and advertising, or if you have too much video or you want to monetize it off your site, you can work with the publishers in their marketplace. So really an opportunity to create more and more video inventory and therefore more and more video advertising. And I think that's reflected in Daniel's charts. And then if we look to how this could continue to grow in the future, I think we'll see more broadcaster inventory becoming available, more OTT, over-the-top inventory. The question is really, where do you draw the line between what's video advertising and what's TV advertising? Is it the content or is it the device that you're watching on? So I think the lines are really blurring, because if you think, for example, the Olympics were broadcast live by Eurosport, live over the top by Eurosport this summer. So if you were watching it on your mobile phone, is that mobile video? Or if you're watching it on the connected TV, Daniel said the big screen, the TV set, is that TV viewing. Similarly with ITV's Love Island, the big hit of the summer, very high proportion of viewers watching that program live OTT this summer. Some in the living room on the TV set, some watching it live through the broadcast television, and then a very high proportion of people watching it on their mobile phones. So viewing of video is now moving across all screens. Advertisers want to reach people across all screens, so I expect this would continue to grow. And it's actually an area that the IAB Europe is very interesting. We're creating a white paper on this topic, which we plan to launch at the Future of TV Advertising Summit, called the IAB Europe Connected TV White Paper.
Thanks, Joe. It's Simon. I think there's a really interesting opportunity for the future that's coming here as well. So rightly, you talked about how consumption is changing. If we start to look forward to potential growth of 5G in Europe, actually that real split between TV watched on a device at home on a wireless setup versus actually literally on the move wireless consumption is also going to change really significantly. And so I think that distinction of what is TV and what is connected TV is really going to evolve strongly over the next 18 months as well.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Joanna. James, I would like to touch upon a little bit onto more of a geographical consideration. And I mean, we've seen that the growth in the Central European region is quite striking. I would like your help in kind of like defining what is, in your view, that's driving this growth.
Yeah, sure. Happy to comment on that. I wasn't at all surprised to see the numbers from the study this year on the growth in Central and Eastern Europe. I think most of the companies on this panel have probably seen similar growth in their own numbers. I think to start, the German market, obviously, from a geographic perspective, more or less anchors that region, and it's the largest market within the Central and Eastern European region. There has been a lot of pent-up demand for programmatic advertising in the German market for a number of structural reasons. Some German publishers were a little slower than some of their European counterparts in implementing things like header bidding and embracing the concept of the unified auction. And while that happened, I believe that advertisers and agencies were really sort of chomping at the bit, more or less, to open up that inventory and to start purchasing it programmatically. A lot of programmatic growth in general is driven by the buyers and the demand side looking for more efficiency in their buys. So I think this year, in 2017 and certainly in 2018, we really started to see the German market open up, and I think that's been a really key driver of that growth. The second thing I'll say is that many of the countries in the East European region, specifically countries like Poland, are probably some of the fastest growing economies in Europe. According to McKinsey, the Polish economy has more than doubled in size over the last 25 years as measured by real GDP. I mean, that's an incredible accomplishment when you think about it, and especially for a country with such a large population. Add to that, I would say just a massive embracing of the technologies associated with advanced programmatic techniques. And the Polish market is probably one of my favorite economies and favorite markets in the European region, and certainly poised for massive growth in the next few years. And then I think we've seen a lot from the smaller economies in the smaller countries in the East European region as well. But taken collectively, it still represents a big market opportunity. eMarketer has rightly pointed out that digital ad spend in the region has been increasing dramatically, nearly 20% over the last 4 years. And so, that increase in digital ad spend, combined with fast-growing economies and an embracing of sort of advanced programmatic techniques, I think has really set the stage and set the foundation for the kind of growth that we've seen over the last few years. And I think more importantly, the kind of growth that we will see over the next few years. And I fully expect that when we have this panel next year, we'll be telling a similar story on Central and Eastern Europe, and those numbers will be even more impressive.
Yeah, I think as well, James, it's the ability to accelerate from a lower base. But I love the point you make about moving through some of the stages in much quicker steps, right? So they're able to go from a programmatic 1.0 to programmatic 3.0 at the point they enter the market, and therefore quickly get to rich inventory sets. And just the evolution of opportunity, I think, has really driven people forward there as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think Simon's point on the opportunities for 5G wireless connectivity in Europe, I think you're going to see the economies of Eastern Europe potentially leapfrog again by embracing that particular paradigm. And I think that, it won't be long before we see almost a parity in market opportunity with between Eastern and Western Europe.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, James and Simon. Moving on, I'm quite interested to understand and dive a little bit deeper into what we think are the key challenges and key opportunities for programmatic moving forward. And Bill, would you like to address this?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the things that I was going to say on this have already been addressed, but I'll kind of repeat that. I think there's still lots of headroom for growth within mobile. So we were just talking about new technology within the mobile space that should improve, how we do business, or the technology around our business operations. And you know, what I've seen from many publishers that I've talked to in my network and then within Shipstead marketplaces is that a lot of the audience has gone over to the mobile devices very quickly, and the product development on that side and making and offering up the insights and the data to marketers so that they understand what they're getting when they buy on inventory on our mobile devices. That is a challenge, but also a huge opportunity, just because of the immense size of the audience that's moved over to mobile devices. So again, I think this is a difficult one because it's in the mobile space, because it's a different set of tech, especially when we're talking about apps and things of that nature, where we're not necessarily dealing with cookies, so the whole retargeting thing is not there. And so there's a lot of special strategies that need to be developed in the mobile space. So I see that as a challenge, but of course, if you solve those problems for marketers, then it's a massive opportunity. And then the other thing that I've seen, we saw the statistics in Western Europe, but I'm based out of Barcelona, in Spain. I think that small to mid-sized businesses in Europe are still going through, in many places, especially countries like Spain or Italy. But in many ways, there's also headroom and challenges that publishers can kind of address for marketers within the journey within digital transformation. I think that it's very important to kind of understand that companies or marketers will be in different phases, as Simon said, and publishers need to give solutions to the SMBs that can so that they can kind of address their digital marketing needs. So I think that, again, that's a big challenge and a massive opportunity, and that's from more of a Shipstead perspective, because we're a marketplaces group, and we have thousands of clients that already advertise with us within working with classifieds, right? And so that's specific to us. But I also think that for even traditional media, there can be kind of a joint effort in terms of kind of to try and evangelize small to mid-sized businesses and using programmatic technologies. So there's a big opportunity for growth there as well.
Thank you, Bill. And I would like to, last but not least, conclude with you, Simon. If we look at the next 18 months, right, to do a summary of this very, very good panel and research, what can we say are the main emerging areas for programmatic trading?
So I think there's a big continued emergence of just core programmatic, right? And I think you see that in the continued growth rate. Even display, which is a mature state, continues to grow. Video itself, as Daniel said, is still growing in double-digit year-over-year growth. So there's natural growth there. There's market maturity growth as we move through. And then there's emerging opportunities, particularly around video, in terms of actual access to content and video opportunity. And we've talked about the growth of broadcasters with Joanna. But there are new emerging areas alongside that. So I think audio is a nascent opportunity really still, but there is interest on the demand and the supply side. Audio can be many things. So there's music audio, podcast audio. There's also potentially, in probably the longer window, opportunities around voice search and voice opportunities. That's a really hard one to predict what's going to happen. Digital out of home seems to be finding its feet, and there seems to be emerging players in that area. There's a good opportunity there for everyone. But I also think there's a couple of industry points that will help. I think we've talked about access and 5G as a driver over 18 months, just giving more people more consistent, better access, enabling more use of video, richer formats. I also think we've got things like OpenRTB 3.0, which will come into the industry in that window. And hopefully that's going to address some of those concerns that have been around trust and transparency, move towards some digital signature of inventory. It's a big challenge, actually, 3.0, so that's going to take some time, so maybe it'll go beyond that time period. But it's not all going to be plain sailing, and I think there's a couple of macro concerns that everyone needs to also keep a strong mind on. One is the continued impact of GDPR, and you know, I'm pretty pleased we got nearly through a panel without talking about GDPR.
We'll get there.
But I feel duty bound to do it. You know, both GDPR and e-privacy's future regulations in the next 18 months will clarify, tighten. I think even the IAB's transparency and consent framework will evolve. And so that's going to just require work and effort from everyone within the industry. And, you know, particularly from a UK perspective, there's some fairly tense negotiations going on right now. But actually, the ability for macroeconomic impact over the next 18 months is pretty significant. We all know, it's funny because it's November, if the economy catches a cold, advertising tends to catch a cold. So those are some of the hurdles I think also we have to keep a close eye on. I think the good thing is, both via IAB Europe and actually via just the will of all players in the industry, people are working better collaboratively to get past these challenges. So the future is certainly very, very, very exciting, I think, for all of us.
Fantastic. And on this positive and optimistic note, would any of our panelists want to add anything else to Simon's note?
Yeah, I think a couple of additional challenges and opportunities specifically to video, if I may. I think, you know, there's a risk that the GAFA make it so easy to buy video advertising and programmatic advertising that there is a risk that more and more programmatic revenue could flow in that direction. There's also a risk of SVOD, subscription video on demand, which includes live video. So as more and more people subscribe to viewing services, it could be a risk for broadcasters because they can't reach them via advertising if they're paying for a subscription with no ads, such as, for example, Netflix at the moment, which doesn't have advertising. But on the other hand, that creates scarcity, which means that advertising prices could go up and you could have more quality advertising delivered programmatically, but with fewer adverts. It's also an opportunity, though. Many of the broadcasters we worked with across Europe and around the world have grasped this opportunity and created ad-funded TV on-demand services, which are cheaper than a subscription version. For example, in Denmark, TV2 has a SVOD service and also an AVOD service, which is cheaper with ads. And then the Nordic Entertainment Group across the region has via free as well as via play. So I think, to Simon's point, as these challenges come up, it's clear that the major players on both the demand and supply side will address them with new innovations and collaborate to move things forward and continue to grow.
I think there's another really, really exciting thing. I think we haven't seen the biggest transformation that programmatic can bring about. And to understand that, we have to take a little bit of a step back and see what's really happening at a macro level at the advertiser. Advertisers need to cut costs and ensure that every marketing dollar delivers ROI. So the CMO is under pressure as never before. And more than 2/3 of CMOs these days have already shared or owned P&L responsibilities, which means they increasingly need to speak the same language and metrics as the CEO and the CFO. And so far, marketing has been predominantly seen by the rest of the C-suite as a necessary expenditure, but something that can be cut liberally as well. In programmatic, we have so far just programmaticized or digitized conventional ways of buying, we still have the conventional metrics, clicks, views, engagement, CPA, CPM, and so forth. Programmatic can help bridge the CMO-CFO gap through its data measurement and feedback, create an insight into, does advertising really move business objectives forward? So the whole idea around driving business outcomes through advertising will be a radical change and programmatic will be the infrastructure for that to bring the CFO and the CMO closer together.
Thank you very, very much. If nobody has anything else to add, I would do a last round of thank you to Daniel, James, Joanna, Simon, and Bill for joining me today on this panel. And I'll leave the stage, or rather the virtual stage, to David, who's going to run us through the key findings of the Attitudes Towards Programmatic Advertising report.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone on the phone and in the room. My name is David Goddard, and I'm the Vice President of Global Programmatic Strategy at BBC Global News Limited. Just for those who don't know, BBC Global News Limited is the commercial arm of the BBC that monetises a TV and digital portfolio of the BBC outside the UK, returning value back to the BBC, making the world-renowned content that many people know and love. Today's presentation and panel, which I'm more excited about, is based on the data from one of IAB Europe's most comprehensive studies, Attitudes to Programmatic Advertising. I feel it's really a finger on the pulse of advanced programmatic markets. It really does flesh out the key concerns that impact all of digital marketing. This is because the survey received approximately 550 respondents between April and June 2018. The responses came from advertisers, agencies, and publishers in 31 markets, and respondents had both a pan-European and global remit. Although most of the data is based on Europe respondents, a number of the concerns are global and will be impacting all in media. This is the fourth year of the Attitudes Towards Programmatic, or Attitude to Programmatic report. This is a snapshot of the report and will give a view of how the industry's attitude to programmatic has changed by comparing 2018 with 2017 results. This will highlight the challenges that have been addressed and thus dropped in concern, and those that are very much front of mind in the advertiser, agency, and publisher. The report was released on IAB Europe's website on September 12, 2018. So I recommend all of you on the phone after today to download a copy of the report and look at the details. There are many more interesting pieces of data that we won't be talking about today in there, might be affecting you, and there are also a number of white papers and webinars available to you too. So, slide 2 is, we know the market is maturing. Industry has recently seen key milestones: implementation of GDPR, advertisers and buyers demanding more control and transparency, recruiting and retaining talent. All this research was conducted between April and June this year. So it was very much conducted at the height of GDPR implementation. Thus, the research was rolled out at a key point of heightened alert from our industry. The challenges highlighted on this slide are reflected in the latest IAB Europe's Attitudes to Programmatic research. We're going to go through a few of those now. So, this shows the top drivers and challenges for each stakeholder group: advertisers, agencies, and publishers. These are increasing control, transparency. For publishers, they want to know more how their inventory is being sold and to whom, and what margins are being taken along the way. And IAB Europe has developed a transparency guide to try and help drive transparency through this supply chain. So we also see continuations of brand safety and areas of fraud, which are blocking and causing barriers to investment. And finally, the interesting one, despite us being in a very automated industry, we talk about automation today, people tend to be throwing up the challenges, and especially hiring the right talent and skill sets. This also remains a challenge, finding these and retaining them to help drive programmatic within organizations. So we've seen from the market sizing data that the market continues to grow. However, in the way in which programmatic advertising operations are executed are evolving, with a particular shift to change in advertisers. We could describe this as an evolution of the partnership. When we look at how stakeholders execute programmatic, we notice a difference in year-on-year growth of in-house operations amongst advertisers. Also, the growth of hybrid models, which allow for an element of control, but also consist of a partnership. Despite the number of advertisers outsourcing to an agency, though, is decreasing, this tends to be a trend that's actually slowing over the last few years. For example, it dropped from 63% in 2016 to 46% in 2017, and then only to 35% in 2018. But it's not just in housing. The hybrid model is also on the rise too. It's slight, but it's significant. It could become the new area of growth that will overcome the barriers to in-housing programmatic, which we'll address in the panel, but we highlighted area, which tends to be people resourcing and bringing up the education in the organizations. Over the last year, there has been suggestions that consultancies are coming into the media buying space too. The data in this report is yet to support this, but will this change next year? Moving on to agencies, we've seen from the market sizing data that, for the agencies, outsourcing to independents and DSPs is declining, and in-house trading desks continue to grow. It is also worth to note that 2/3 of agencies, 62%, and 2/3 of publishers, 63%, that don't currently have an in-house model are considering bringing programmatic in-house in the next 12 months. For advertisers, the figure is lowered to 43%, considering it to bring it in-house as well. Moving on to publishers, likewise, publishers have also continued on this trend of in-housing, driven by a drop in a hybrid model, which was once so popular to publishers. Interestingly, the model that grew the most this year is one model that bucked the trend, that hit the headlines. It is also the one that almost slipped under the radar. This was the number of publishers who outsourced to an SSP, which grew from 8% to 13%, which is getting close to doubling there. It raises a question that will be asked to our panel shortly: why would a stakeholder not in-house? The drivers for taking programmatic in-house are related to increasing control of data, operations, and better monetization of inventory. Control is key, and I'm sure we'll only see this grow over the coming years as programmatic becomes the mechanism to deliver digital and other media campaigns. Just to highlight a few of these, advertisers requested greater transparency, reducing agency costs, and keeping first-party data under control in their top 3 of reasons to in-house. Agencies, again, increasing operational control and better access to audience insights and better understanding of the consumer pathway to help them deliver value back to their clients. And publishers, a key driver is monetization of inventory, followed by efficiencies in sales and operations, and for publishers, integration of their own data into programmatic to fulfill advertisers' needs. So next is metrics as well, and it's not just operations and challenges that are evolving, so is the way programmatic campaigns are evaluated. In 2017, we saw a shift away from the click to more, 2018, we saw a shift away from the click to more branding metrics, and the element transpires across the board as a consolidation of the approach that focuses back on core business objectives such as sales KPIs and CPMs. And we can't get away with a presentation about programmatic trends without mentioning data and the 4-letter acronym that goes hand in hand, GDPR. The use of first-party data remains consistently high, whilst the use of second-party data has seen a slight decrease amongst advertisers and publishers. And I'm sure this will be highlighted again in 2019's attitude towards programmatic. So, despite some of the challenges highlighted, more than 90% of stakeholders expect to continue to increase their programmatic investment over the next 12 months. And if we consider how many sectors of advertising are still not fully automated, out-of-home billboard, print, most OTT, we can agree that there is still plenty of room for growth. We are now going to move straight into our expert panel to discuss a number of the topics from this year's Attitude Towards Programmatic study, and I'd like to invite all the panelists to introduce themselves before we jump into the questions, starting with those who are dialed in, so Sandra and then Ed.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited to be here with you guys this morning. I'm Vice President of Demand Product and Partnerships at Improve Digital. I'm based here in Amsterdam. Improve Digital is a European SSP and part of the Xerion Group.
Hi everyone, Ed Weatherall here from Seismic. I'm VP of our partnership market, so that encompasses, as the panel talked about, CEE, Greece, Turkey, but also MENA and South Africa as well. I'm really looking forward to getting involved.
Hi guys, happy to be here. I'm Ash. I lead display over at HSBC UK.
Lisa Kaluzny, I run the demand team over at Programmatic, which is an SSP.
I'm Rick Jones. I'm SVP for Global Revenue Growth at Adform. We are a platform looking after advertisers, publishers, and agency on the buy and sell side.
Thank you very much all. So we're going to jump into the first question. I'm going to tackle the topic that hit the headlines post the release of the report, which is we've seen in-house models continue to increase. From your perspective, why is this? And we're really lucky enough to have an advertiser on our panel, so I'm going to come straight to Ash to answer this question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dave. So in terms of in-housing, before we start, like you mentioned in your presentation that in-housing isn't necessarily just a black and white concept where you have, contracts on one side and doing everything in-house yourself on the other. There's a full spectrum and shades of grey in between. I guess one of the reasons why potentially you'd lean towards the more contractual side of things is, I guess, standardization. So if you consider yourself being a global advertiser, nearly 4,000 offices globally, it just makes sense to have one standardized contract where you can manage your data, manage all your partnerships through one essential entity. Which leads me on to say that agencies still kind of play a part in this too, in terms of the standardization process, because you have to remember that agencies are experts and networked agencies do have people on the ground across the various markets that you operate in. And like I said, standardization is my opinion as to why more advertisers are
Fascinating thought, and just making sure that everyone's adhering to the same processes, so you get the same outputs coming out of that. It's a really interesting point of view.
Especially when it comes to things like data management as well. So, for example, having a global DMP where all of your data sits, as opposed to having multiple platforms in different markets. That allows you to do things like global suppression, global modeling against your user base, things like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, still being compliant.
Absolutely, but it sounds, global organizations find it challenging if each market is having their own point of view about what tech vendors and things. Exactly. Consolidation is crucial, and we're not talking about market consolidation, we're actually talking consolidation within our own organizations. Exactly. Yeah. That's brilliant. Lisa, it would be interesting to hear, because you work heavily with the demand side, and I'm sure you've seen many different partners taking different approaches to this. What can you share with us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we often forget is that publishers are advertisers too, and that they are often in market trying to figure out both how to sell their inventory programmatically, but also how to be an advertiser. And so they've looked a lot at in-housing themselves versus going through agencies, as they do have programmatic teams, and how to work with the head of digital, including the head of programmatic, and how to marry both ecosystems together. And we've seen a lot of interest and have worked with a number of publishers, from having them just be our SSP partner to also being their demand partner and helping their marketing team figure out their programmatic strategy, how best to use the inventory that we have, and so they can kind of buy strategically from that way.
I love that. Publishers are advertisers too. That's certainly a quite I'll probably use it internally myself. But fascinating thoughts. Does anyone else on the phone or in the room want to have another opinion or add anything else to this question before we move on? Lovely. Okay. Despite in-housing growing, it does not suit all. And as I alluded to in the small presentation at the start of this, not all are in-housing. Some are moving away from that. We've flagged it in the publishers, and we also saw challenges around hiring talent as a barrier to in-housing. So my question to all of you is, we'll start with Lisa again, is why would a stakeholder not in-house?
I think from the conversations we've had with brands that have programmatic teams, head of digitals, they actually still use the agency as it becomes a central point for all media. So yes, we live in a programmatic environment, and programmatic is kind of the world that we're in day to day. But we do forget that brands need to have campaigns and out of home and TV. And an agency allows the brand to actually be that central point so that all communication and alignment on that global campaign can be in one place. I think additionally, the programmatic expertise that you have from an agency is key, and that, as the survey said, training is such a challenge and hiring the right staff. So these agencies are they have those people. I'd say the last part is the rates. So the teams at the agencies have gone out and aggressively negotiated these rates with publishers. So if you're coming at it from, I am just brand one, and this is what I want to buy, and this is my budget, you're probably not going to get the same kind of preferential treatment that you would get if you are a large holding company negotiating rates for hundreds of brands.
Fascinating. Ed, on the phone, I know Seismic, you're working with many stakeholders across our ecosystem, or a couple big ones, advertisers and agencies primarily. I'm sure you've got something to share on this question.
Yeah, definitely. I think a key thing from my point of view, people talk about control, but I think there's also an illusion of control when people are buying technology. I think from a tech perspective, I think it's important that, as a brand, if you're bringing in a house or a publisher or an agency, if there's a tech provider, someone is buying inventory but also sells their own inventory, there's obviously, it's understanding how that conflict is managed from a client's perspective. Do you understand it? Can you see it? I think there's also, people have talked about the maturity of the market. So, do you have the talent to bring it in, test it, learn and move quickly with the market? It's a good example looking at that. If you look at the amount of Europeans fleeing to the land of gold of Dubai, because there's a huge influx of wanting programmatic talent there, and it's pillaging the European market to sort of find and bring that talent out of Europe into MENA. And the other key thing, and as Lisa was saying, is that it's the agencies and the consultancies' role to find the best tech stacks or multiple techs working together to deliver whatever the results or performance that a client wants or key stakeholders want, being the agency or the client. So it isn't. I always question why someone would have just one technology trying to do everything. Because I think that then it is actually okay. Well, why would I work with an agency if you just use one platform and you've been using the same platform for 2 to 3 years? What have you tested? What else have you learned? So I think it is. It's if the agencies and the consultancies and what they're really there for is that expertise are providing that service. It's very difficult as a client to learn across multiple platforms because you're only working with your single brand.
Thank you very much. And Rick, from Adform's perspective, I'm sure, again, you've got certain experiences in this in-housing or not to in-house.
Yeah, so for many years, actually, I was in Ash's shoes. I was a client. I was an advertiser for the likes of John Lewis and Sony and others. And I suppose the point I'd like to make is that, often we lump together advertisers into this homogenous group of their brands or advertisers. The differences, we've heard a bit about this already on some of the comments, are huge, particularly when you start to look at factors like the verticals that they're in, the level of sophistication and where they are on their general digital transformation journeys. Those are huge factors in whether they're ready or receptive for programmatic, let alone in-housing. For example, I worked on an in-housing project with Netflix a few years ago, and because they are a digital-first pure-play business, their level of sophistication lent itself brilliantly to doing that in the very best way. And they made some mistakes because they were first, really, one of the first, but they learned very quickly and they were able to implement. Others who are not anywhere near the level of Netflix, FMCGs or less sophisticated retailers, as examples, really struggle, really make many more mistakes, and these are big factors. We can't group everyone together.
I absolutely agree. I mean, yeah, every business is complex. No business is the same. So
senior management buy-in as well is key as well. If you don't have that sponsorship at a board level of what you're trying to do, then then that journey is always going to be so much broader.
Exactly. Sorry, make a really good point on that. So I think kind of taking a step back, a lot of people kind of forget that the nature of advertisers isn't marketing. Like, you're dealing with marketing departments and managing, I guess, internal business priorities. That could be another potential reason why, you know, advertisers might not necessarily be as willing to move in-house as quickly.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it's very hard not to think there's another world outside of advertising when we're in and living and breathing it every day. But again, come back to key stakeholders, you know, board levels, comes back to that education then. How do we educate senior members, C-suites within our organisations to understand why, what the benefits are? But look, for those of you on the phone, if you're a publisher, advertiser, and agency, and you are grappling with a lot of the challenges we've just discussed over those last two questions, there's a bit of helpful information on IAB Europe's website, a couple of infographics, and they are key considerations for a buy side or sell side programmatic strategy. So that there's two infographics there. If you're a publisher or advertiser or agency, we'll give you kind of key questions to ask yourself to say, is programmatic right for my business? And if so, what kind of setup shall I go for, in-housing or external, dependent on the answers to the questions that it tries to flag out. So a bit of a helpful guide there. But we've spoken about you know, the growth of programmatic, and it's really drivers such as greater transparency, control, and monetization still prevail as the key forces behind the growth of programmatic. But how have these evolved over the last 12 months? Rick, I'm going to come straight back to you first and foremost to kick off this question, if that's okay.
Sure. So, you know, so many things we could probably spend at least a session by itself on this topic. But some of the headlines for me are, you know, the contracts that you see between agencies and brands are increasingly transparency-led, I would say, in terms of the spirit that they come in. Equally, the RFIs that you know, brands that are looking to contract directly with vendors, they are again transparency-led in a way which I think 12 months ago we didn't see at all. And then you've got this general cleanup of the supply side, which we've talked a lot about already this morning. And I think with the move to ads.cert, you know, which is as was described earlier, not going to happen overnight, is going to be, you know, a change that will take a while. You know, the technology is not quite there yet, let alone the implementation. But you know, that begins to give you a truly stable, you know, I'm sorry, I'm going to bring in the blockchain. We've had GDPR, so I'll bring in blockchain. But you know, it's blockchain-based technology that will create the grounds for eradicating a lot of the frustration that we currently all suffer from in terms of the black box that is the, you know, the overriding supply side problem, and the lack of trust. So as soon as you have a system which begins to create the grounds for greater trust, then I think we'll see all of the things that marketers want, which is efficiency of spend and more effective advertising. Again, let's not forget the basics here. That's what people are trying to do. We've created an industry which has lots of great things in between, but you know, it's the drive for transparency which will lead to the things that we originally set out to try and achieve.
No, thank you very much. We're at risk of winning buzzword bingo with the mention of blockchain there this panel. But
I couldn't resist it, I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. But Ed, look, I'm conscious that you're able to give a kind of a multi-market point of view on this answer as well. If you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Yeah, definitely. I think the last panel sort of talked to it as well. You know, the growth of CE in these places, rather than entering programmatic where we all were 6, 7, 8 years ago, they're coming at it to what programmatic is today. So they're starting with a view on transparency. They've already got, you know, they've read all of the white papers from ourselves at the IAB to understand, okay, well, what is best practice? What should I do? What should I not do? But there are definitely differences in what people want from programmatic in those markets. You've got the differences between we talked about the programmatic direct or direct buy. You've got publisher-led markets where the publishers are the powerhouses in those particular emerging markets or particularly European markets. So it's very much them leading the conversation of what it is programmatic will deliver, what are viewability, what are standard viewability rates, and also what tech they will work with themselves as a publisher. So they're the ones with the inventory, they're the ones driving that conversation. Where in other markets, which you'd probably label all of the more mature markets, it's advertiser-led, where advertisers there with what they say is a big budget, and they're saying, well, if anyone wants any of this money, you're going to have to behave this way, and that way. And what's always interesting is that discussion of what's fair between the publisher and the advertiser and the technology companies in between. To Rick's point, I think it's evolving, and we're getting better and better. And I think the other key part is around data. So what data is shared, what data isn't shared. With GDPR has changed the behaviour of a lot of organisations. Some sharing less, and some saying, well, there's still the ability to share. I think that's the key bit for everyone, is that each market is different. So it is making sure that you understand, okay, what is the most important metric for programmatic in my particular market, and then and who controls the metrics.
Is there anyone else on the phone or in the room who wants to add any more to this? Lovely. So this year, I mentioned earlier as well, this year's report saw an evolution of metrics, resulting in emergence of some consider brand metrics to measure success of programmatic activity across all stakeholders. What is driving this evolution? Ash, being the advertiser in the room, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come to you again on this one, because I'm interested to hear your point of view on this.
So in my opinion, brand and performance doesn't necessarily always need to sit in these kind of separate silos where they're measured differently and treated differently. I guess the kind of analogy to make would be you don't treat brand search and generic search completely differently, do you?
No.
Right? Does anyone hear?
No.
And I guess we kind of get bogged down in these kind of additional metrics that keep kind of coming about every so often, but we kind of forget like really kind of basic 101 marketing principles like incrementality. What ultimately comes down to is my budget driving incremental business to incremental sales to my business? And fair enough, these metrics kind of they're good optimization points. They you can kind of benchmark the performance of your campaign, but do they really affect my bottom line? That's what I'm trying to ultimately get to.
No, it's interesting. We tend to enjoy saying, well, that's a direct response metric and that's a brand metric, but your answer there says they can be the same. You can use brand metrics to measure direct response.
Like I said, it ultimately comes down to it as an advertiser is, am I getting more for my budget? Is my TV ad driving more people to a branch to open an account? Yeah. Is my branded search driving more accounts online? It's different, but still the same.
It's interesting. I mean, there's me thinking programmatic guaranteed must be the driver of this, or video growth is, but really, actually, no, we're just being more accountable in programmatic advertising.
In terms of how we approach, as in display, is we don't necessarily have a mandate to spend. Well, to be honest, most advertisers shouldn't necessarily have a mandate to spend direct versus programmatic. It's ultimately what drives value for them.
Yes, that's interesting. So maybe we can just allude from that as revenue growth, more values coming back. Lisa.
I was just mad. I think digital and then therefore programmatic has kind of created this level of accountability where you have advertisers who are like, okay, I'm going to run this campaign and I want to know why, I'm going to target these 4 people and I want to know why my campaign isn't scaling. Whereas if you look historically at the way TV, print, out-of-home campaigns have run, I don't think anyone planning a TV campaign is like, well, why hasn't my campaign gotten to these 4 people? I think programmatic has gotten to such a level where we're looking for that very, very niche audience, and nobody's actually realizing, well, maybe that audience doesn't exist, or how do we actually scale and find the true attribution modeling versus going through and saying, well, that person in that market who likes A, B, C, and D didn't see my ad. So obviously the campaign failed.
So you're saying we're creating lots more buttons,
Yeah.
and we can't resist pushing them.
Yep.
Really, we should look back at traditional media and the success of growth there and apply that to modern digital.
I think it's bringing the two together because and it's the maturity of the measurement revolution that we're now enabled around, which is as you say, Lisa, versus the 80s 90s when it was just about very hard to attribute TV and other traditional forms of advertising, and that then comes back to if we can mature in a way so that metrics are something that the board can understand. That picks up a point in the previous panel about then the CMO is truly accountable and can demonstrate the true value of the things that they're running.
Comes back to that education yet again. Yeah, it does. Yes. It does, doesn't it? It's amazing. Just on the phone, I'm conscious you're not in the room on there. Do you want to add in anything to this question before we move on?
Yeah, well, I think I was at an event in Greece not long ago with the brand performance was the name of one of the titles. The typical thing that we do in marketing of take two words and make a new one. But I think that they offer different things as well. I think you look at the world's most valuable brands and the efforts that goes into that is that I buy my family holiday from a brand that I recognise and trust. Whereas so that's a different sort of metric of building that trust to take my share of wallet versus when I'm buying my Amazon or washing powder or whatever I'm buying, which is a less considered purchase. So I do think also there is that case for separation as well. But I agree with everyone that it's also to our merit, but also to our downfall that we talk about. Well, we can measure everything, we can attribute everything, but that's why we've been now in this world of viewability, all of those things, because well, was the ad seen? So how are you attributing that ad to the fact that you drove that conversion if they didn't see the ad? And all of these sort of things is, that's what we're evolving on the promise that we made that we'll track everything and we'll be able to attribute everything. And then I suppose potentially in the past, that's where the trust has been eroded in the programmatic industry as well.
It's a fascinating point. And there's certainly some work to be done on what metrics we should keep and which ones we should get rid of, because there are plenty of choice out there. I'm going to move on to some of the barriers. I mean, we flagged again, and it's almost fourth year in a row, issues such as ad fraud, quality and transparency are impeding and impacting growth, despite great efforts from the industry trying to tackle these. I just want the people on the phone and obviously in the room to highlight kind of what is actually being done to tackle these and what more can we do. Sandra, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Sure. I think addressing the issues in general is part of the industry maturity. And it's great to see also that a lot of publishers and advertisers are bringing in-house teams, because this also reflects a lot of the knowledge that it's being acquired by all these professionals. But I truly believe that it comes down to accountability, right? Accountability of all of us, all the entities of this ecosystem, to hold each other responsible for a more transparent brand safety marketplace. But the good news is actually we're already seeing a lot of fronts being addressed these issues. So for example, on the demand side, by David, what you shared with us on advertisers, agencies, they're very focused on brand safety, fraud-free traffic, but also the DSPs are pushing, and developing, products in order to roll out such a, I would say, transparent marketplace, such as curated marketplaces. You see a lot of the DSPs adopting pre-bid ad verification technologies, and several, SPO programs being rolled out. And also on the SSP side or on the supply side, it's, the technology needs to hold as well a responsibility to make sure that you are ensuring a cleaner supply and helping also publishers to improve their supply creation, right? So I'm talking mainly on the networks. How can we provide insights to them to improve the way that they are making available this inventory to the whole marketplace? And even, as simple as sharing, the fronts that the demand partners are taking to avoid those types of, let's say low quality supply to be sold. So I think it's a very group and joint efforts for us to have a cleaner market. But there is still, I think, a lot to be done in the industry level. But by holding each other accountable, I believe it is a very good way to expedite its growth.
Fantastic, thank you, Sandra. Some really interesting points there, and I agree. It's an effort from all. Lisa, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think what Rick said about cleaning up the supply chain is something that we have been working hard to do, and it is something that we all have to do together. And if we're not doing it together, then it's counterproductive. So what we've done is we've established like a fraud-free program. So how to get rid of the bad actors out there. We will refund any sort of fraud that is by an MRC accredited vendor reported to us by our buyers, no questions asked. And additionally, we monthly remove sites that we have found to have a low trust score, and we have an IQ lead who loves inventory quality. It's like what keeps him up at night, obsessed with fraud, like looks forward to kind of finding out the bad players. So we're constantly focused on that, but I think it really is working together, reporting the ad fraud, and making sure that we're giving the buyers the most clean transparency. Because I think from a supply perspective, everyone looks at the supply chain before that. It's not a DSP conversation, it's a supply conversation. So we as SSPs have to band together and say, we're all going to do it, because otherwise it's just going to go, the bad actors are going to go from one SSP and bounce to the next, to the next, to the next. So it's about working together.
Absolutely. And, with positive initiatives happening in all of these, we've seen, SSPs begin, and publishers and, advertisers begin to work towards this cleaning this up with S.txt. Ash, look, I'm conscious as your digital dollar as the advertiser going in the top of the funnel, and it tends to be the advertiser who's driving the conversation of what's going on with my advertising revenue.
Yeah,
I'd love to get your point of view.
I'd say definitely establishing that kind of two-way relationship between yourselves, well, an advertiser and an agency is definitely important. Like just being, as an advertiser, like, I understand, all these issues exist, like we get it, but just as long as we know that it is happening and what's being done about it, kind of helps, put our minds at rest. Because to be honest, like in terms of like the transparency piece, we want to know where our money's going, because ultimately we want to spend more. I think Rick, you mentioned it earlier. We have targets, we want to grow, so does everyone else. And as long as we're kept in the loop, we're happy.
Very much. I'm getting the flashing timer. I'm very conscious that we have very little time, probably a minute or two if I'm lucky. So look, we're going to do a really quick round on the last question, if you wouldn't mind. So Sandra, I want to come to you first. With the simplification, and it's a big question actually to try and answer in a swift way, I'm sorry. But with simplification with our industry and consolidation, rebranding in stacks from Google, Amazon, and Oath, do you think that programmatic will stop being a topic itself and just equate to digital? Sandra, as quickly as you can, I'm sorry.
Sure. So first and foremost, I don't think the tech industry is getting any simpler. I think to the despair of the CMO's wishes for simplification. But the knowledge on how to operate in the programmatic space is definitely increasing. And also another point regarding the walled gardens, such as Facebook, Amazon, Google. Yes, whoever wants to run there, they know where to go and they know their tech and the data that they're going to get from it. But also that there is the rest of the world, right? The rest of the internet. I think it's really good to see that they're not the representative of the majority. And I think really zooming into EMEA specifically as a region, we are dealing with such a different region, right? You have, specific privacy laws. We are dealing with different levels of market maturity, different tech and data players here, different countries, right? So the complexity, I think, to navigate this ecosystem just increases, I think, in a region such as Europe. But I think the silver lining here is that we are seeing the ad tech parties that are outside walled garden forming alliances, right? Whether it's on identity, where you see Digitrust, Advertising AD Consortium, or also on the transparency side, right? So I think going back to the last question, the last topic is that we need to keep on doing this joint effort with intention to add more efficiency to the programmatic buying, but also to really share and deploy this knowledge of this ever-changing industry. And do believe that as long as there is a benefit leveraging, data on a real-time bidding environment, programmatic is still in vogue, and there is still a lot of room for any of our participants to evolve in this market. As fast as I could, Dave.
That's great, and it was a challenging question. Ed, if you wouldn't mind, super quick, then I'm going to come to Rick.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's echoing Sandra's point that Google, Amazon, there's more to the internet, and that it's in the publisher's interest to say they're the safest environment to advertise, but no one publisher is 100% safe. I think the open market is the exciting bit, and different markets have different things. So Russia isn't Google, it's Yandex and Mail.ru. I think the thing that's making it easier is the UIs and the transparencies within the platforms to buy. So to the point earlier that Ash was making, Seismic, we will show you where every single impression was and what was paid for it. That's the bit that's making it easier to know where your dollar's being spent. But I don't think it's getting easier about where to buy in each individual market. Amazon isn't in every market in Europe. You've got things like, Turkey's got 70 million people, but there's an economical situation there, whereas Poland, as we said earlier, is a huge opportunity for addressing audiences. So I think, the tech's getting easier to use. But again, I would say, remember that as tech providers, it's in our interest to tell you all the benefits of our tech. And that's where potentially the opportunity of having someone using multiple techs, or at least reviewing those technologies, is going to help you be successful in each individual market.
Thank you, Ed.
It's quick.
Rick, fine.
I think the ecosystem, everyone in it is craving more simplicity. And I think ultimately it's the largest advertisers who will drive the need for that. We can no longer tolerate the inefficiency that complexity is creating. And as transparency, again, exposes a lot of that value destruction, we will find that there'll be consolidation, and there will be a more simplistic view of the world. And within that, it's absolutely crucial, as Ed just said, that the open, independent ecosystem is alive and kicking, not just the duopoly.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you all again for sharing your vast amounts of knowledge and debating the topics of this year's Attitudes Towards Programmatic. And thank you all for dialing in for this session. And please, I encourage you to go download this year's report from IAB Europe's website. And we look forward to next year's report and the debate that will follow. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll now move on to Oliver, which, as anticipated at the beginning, is going to give us an update of where we are with transparency and trust. Over to you, Oliver.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks a lot for having me on the presentation today. I'm Oliver Gerritz, Managing Director for Digital for MediaCom across EMEA, and MediaCom is the biggest media agency in EMEA. And I work a lot with big global advertisers, but a lot also with our local markets and local clients. And transparency and trust is one of the big topics that is coming up, also came up in the previous panel. So how am I clicking to the next page?
Just click.
No, it doesn't work. Oh yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. So what does transparency mean? I think there are two elements to transparency, and they both have been addressed in the previous panel. The first one is to understand outcomes. So where does my ad appear? Is it viewable, brand safe, fraud free? And what impact does it have? And that circles around areas like reporting, ad verification, and measurement. And then the other question, to understand where does my money and my data go? So how does the ecosystem function overall? How do intermediaries earn money? So the agencies and the ad tech vendors and the data vendors, etc. And how is my data used and for which purpose? And that second question has been dominating over the last year, and that's why I want to address it first. Can you click, please? So where does the advertiser's money go? In a typical flow, You have a brand that might work with an agency that uses a DSP that buys inventory from an SSP, and then the money reaches a publisher. And what we hear a lot in the public debate is that statement that only 40 cents of the dollar reach the consumer. And that's based on a paper published by the World Federation of Advertisers in 2014, so quite a while ago. And that says that 5% go to the agency, 15% to the agency trading desk, 10% to the DSP, 25% of what they didn't really specify what value adds are, but it includes data and verification, 5% to the ad exchange, so that only 40% of the dollar reached the publisher. I believe that is quite outdated, and I will talk about it, what I think is our more realistic numbers in a minute. Can you click, please? And to drive that discussion forward and to support everyone in asking the right questions and really getting that transparency by understanding how the ecosystem and their partners work, IAB Europe has produced this transparency guide, which is an interactive Prezi presentation that allows you to drill in, depending on who you are in the value chain and which partners you want to talk to, some of the most common and most relevant questions to ask. And these questions center around 3 areas. The first one is data. So if you're using my data, how do you use my data? How are you sharing it with others? How are you doing that in a privacy compliant way? But if you're also buying or selling data, how can we evaluate the quality of that data? The second area is about cost and fees. So how do you earn money? Where does my money go? And making all these costs transparent. And the third one is on inventory sources. So what type of media inventory am I actually buying? And how can I control the quality of that media inventory? So I highly encourage you to go to Prezi and look at it. It's linked from the IAB website. And when you ask those questions, I think you will get a much clearer view on where does my money end up. So where the advertiser's question, where do my 100 euros spent end up? And what I see in a typical setup is that about 12 euros end with an agency. Ad verification is actually not so expensive, so it's less than €1. The DSP gets 8, the SSP 6. Data might not be used at all in your media buy, but on average it might be 15 euros, and then about 59 to 60 euros end with the publisher. And maybe you click a couple more times. So in that model, about 20% of the budget end on the buy side, and 80% end on the sell side. And maybe you click a couple more times, sorry. One more. In the presentation, elements. One is often advertisers only media is working. There's a lot of discussion about working media. But what I say is that in programmatic, you can and media by it separate. The data is as much driving the of your campaign as a media, and it's also publisher. So it's just that they're selling that data and you're separate. Good for the big them to operate it separately. So we should count data into the working ingredient. So in that model, about 75% of the are working. Click more. Then the second thing is that often when people say costs or an agency charges a 50% fee, and obviously that goes up or down depending on the size of the budget and the complexity of the task. But those 15% are not charged off the 100 euro the ad, charged off the media that flows through the system, so of 80% of the budget. So actually pay for a DSP, it's only 8 euros out of the 100. And the same when you say you're paying 10%, that's usually charged on the media that, so it's only euros 100. And that leads to the next message, that there is no such thing as an ad tech tax. That is a discussion that people feel that it's something like a tax they have to pay for the system. But a tax is something that you have to pay by, and you don't direct. With ad tech, it's very different. You can choose the ad tech you want to use. You have competition, choice, price that the ad tech vendors get. So if you don't feel that the value they create is higher than the price they charge, you wouldn't work with them. So that is a normal place where buying technology and service to drive. The same is true when it comes to agencies or other service partners. Essentially, you will only pay the value there, the cost they charge, and therefore I think it's completely misleading, and it's about value creation and being compensated for the value that you create. If you click, and so already mentioned before, and there are different interpretations or definitions, but this one is very close to what you can see on Wikipedia. It's a distributed and encrypted document all transactions between parties that know or trust each other. So that might sound like a good solution programmatic ecosystem where trust is questioned. And but I think it depends really on how, click please. It really depends on how you see place and how it should evolve. Can you click next page? Thank you. Just build the whole page. If you believe that the programmatic market is a black box, and so that buys something from a vendor, and then that vendor buys vendor, and there are many intermediaries in the value chain until in the end of the day he reaches publisher, then you see a market where there's a lot of intermediaries and maybe you don't trust all of them, then block the solution to bring transparency into such a black box. However, I believe that the future programmatic market, much already the current programmatic market, is about shortening the value and having as intermediaries as possible, and also bringing people closer together. Brand might choose to work with an agency and see the agency of their marketing team, and then they choose a technology that they use and control to execute. On the sell side, choose SSPs as so it's part of their offering, and then we notice connection between those two. So the SSPs buys directly, and in that model, trust is based on knowing and selecting the partners you work with, and then obviously over your data to see how. Blockchain would just add another layer of another vendor wanting to make money and adding. So next page, and that's why I'm a big fan of the by industry bodies like IAB, because they usually don't cost money. You can use them without paying a fee, and they are a whole industry, which is important. Otherwise, parts of the industry support a certain technology. So in a very good adoption of ads.txt, which makes it harder for bad actors to sell under a wrong name. And we see 3.0, additional features and functions are added to drive transparency in the programmatic market. One of them is third. So using some of the ideas of blockchain, of cryptography, and make identities can't be hidden. Those are driven at least to drive more transparency into the marketplace and move back out of it. click, please. About cost, as we've done before, I think is really important. Pilots want to money goes and understand how their inventory is monetized. And therefore, I think we have to solve, and I think the discussions and the education about more next question, and that was addressed in the previous panel, advertisers and publishers, because that's in the end what we have to do. Click one more time. So we have from cheaper impressions to quality impressions, and I'm working a lot with advertisers about their quality. What we want to buy impressions that are fraud-free and brand safe, and only when they meet conditions, can you click 2 more times, they are considered quality. Whether the quality impression is a trading metric or whether that is the outcome that we optimize is still a debate, and today very few publishers are able and willing to sell those quality impressions. But ultimately it doesn't matter as long as the buyers are very focused on just counting impressions that are quality and evaluating them against cost, because in the end, about the cost per outcome that we want to drive. I hope we all find the discussion and move away from discussions about viewability rate and fraud rate and brand safety rate, which are important influencing variables and need to be optimized. But ultimately, as an advertiser, I only care about the quality impressions I get in CPM. One more click. And what we see is that quality leads. There has been a study published by Comscore and Kellogg's quite a while, but there are many studies that confirm those learnings that, for example, higher viewability leads to higher sales. It's a no-brainer. If the consumer has a longer or better chance of seeing your message, you have a higher opportunity to influence their attitudes or their behaviors. There has been a second study recently published, if you go back, that looks at that challenge that a lot have to say yes, but quality is coming at a premium price, and is that additional higher CPM I'm paying, is that justified by the higher value I'm paying? It's a study in the IAB and across 8, so very broad mix of advertisers, and they looked, for example, inventory bought on range versus inventory bought on premium deals. And when you evaluate that inventory on the quality impressions that are viewable, fraud-free, and brand safe, you see that actually the premium inventory was cheaper. It had a much higher share of quality impressions. And therefore, I think that is another reason why we should just count those impressions that drive. So it has been mentioned before, and you click a couple of we should move our discussion away from the impressions we buy to the outcomes we're driving. Cost per engagement is a outcome we want to drive, so a click is not enough. It should be some sort of meaningful engagement, watching a video completely or engaging on the website or on an app. Actions I want to drive and action, but even those actions, the direct real business. So we really are sure that we are able to link those real-time metrics we can measure in virtual space to the real business outcome that advertisers want to drive. And when we look at cost per outcome, we will basically be guided towards the right optimization and the right price to pay for our media. Slide. So really means asking questions, and IAB Europe is supporting the market by providing some guidance and some thoughts on which questions to ask. So when it comes to understanding outcomes, there's the IAB Europe brand advertising that addresses measurement and quality and understanding where does my money and my data go. The IAB Europe transparency guide I've briefly introduced is very helpful, but also the IAB Europe transparency and consent framework that manages and for data collection and the use of data along the programmatic value chain. That is not only giving transparency to advertisers and publishers who are using my data for which purpose, but it's even more giving transparency to the consumer. How is their data used and for which purpose, and giving them control. So I hope you engage with those documents, and I hope that they get a lot of traction, because I think that will really drive our industry forward. And I also hope me an email with your thoughts or questions or ideas. So please do not hesitate to reach out. And that's it. Thanks a lot for listening. And now over to the panel.
Oliver, and apologies to everyone on the line for slightly technical difficulties, but that's the beauty of being live. Shares, faster broadband is going to help digital advertising. It's also going to allow us to get better webinars. Without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Lindsay for the final panel for today. 6 months out. Lindsay, over to you.
Valentina. Roundtree, and I head up content globally at ExchangeWire. And obviously, ExchangeWire GDPR has been a hot topic of conversation both before May and the 25th of May 2018 is probably a day that's etched into many people's memories and brains, and we expected absolute Armageddon. So I'm delighted to be joined by 4 experts today who are going to help unpick exactly what has happened with GDPR now we're 6 months on. So let's start with some brief introductions. Andrew, should we kick off with you?
Yes, I'm Andrew Buckman. I'm MD of the Sublime, and Sublime is a high impact ad format and mostly programmatic. Been the forefront of.
Great.
So I head up the programmatic. So we basically help our clients on all things programmatic, from tech, data, inventory point of view, across all clients within them.
Thank you. Thomas?
Hi everyone, Thomas. I work for Nexus and I'm an assistant.
Great. And finally, Nicola.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Nicola Roviaro from Google, and I'm heading data privacy in EMEA within the Google Marketing Platform organization, and with our partners and support that.
Excellent, thank you. So GDPR, we expected absolute Armageddon, that it would be the end of advertising as we know it. Interested to find out if you believe that actually happened or not, and kind of what the impact on programmatic campaigns and the trading of them has been in the 6 months since GDPR came into play. So Thomas, I want to start with you.
So as I was saying, if it happened 25th of May, it's been for consumers, because they get more visibility as to what's being done with their data. Very positive for publisher transparency. When it comes to the industry, I think it hasn't been like what we would have been expecting. Like it has, as bad as we and this is mainly due to the fact that it came up with the entry of the IAB Europe transparency framework. And as we were all busy pushing for the adoption of the framework, I think everybody quite calmed down and the GDPR kind of compliance. But again, as I was saying earlier, GDPR, the 25th of May wasn't necessarily the end of the road, but very much like the beginning of like a compliance effort. And so there's going to be more to come, as like data protection agencies already received complaints. The outcome of it is very much to anyone's guess. And so that's going to probably imply a few additional changes or a bigger impact.
Thank you, Thomas. So, Nicola, your perspective on that, and kind of if you think that there's still a lot more to come, and we're only from the beginning, and what happened in the kind of the 6 months since May 25th.
Yeah, thank you. So definitely has been a big change for everyone. On the specific programmatic campaign trading, what we have observed is that largely marketers, agency partners, tech vendors have been reconsidering how user data gets collected and used, reconsidering some practices within the buying cycle, and it's a huge effort for the whole industry. And Thomas' point, and to the user, also worth to, and realizing that after 6 months, GDPR is probably just one of the change in this digital ad ecosystem to meet higher user expectations. User expectations are rising. People around the world demand more transparency and control of their online data is collected and used. Their awareness is also raising in light of some recent headlines, and therefore we have a to gain their trust and avoid that pace about practices in this industry.
Excellent, thank you. Kind of what have you seen programmatic trading change since GDPR?
Unmuted. So I think not a lot has actually changed. I think a lot of people have put in processes to be ready for it to change. I think Tom was right. I think change is about to happen because there's more and more complaints that are coming in place. We've seen a few that have been logged for a lot of the big ad tech companies that use a lot of data. But for the trading itself hasn't really modified. You have a few DSPs are saying they refuse to buy anything that doesn't have a consent, but they are still buying at this stage. A lot of the SSPs are ready to implement this, but I think everyone's waiting for everyone else to take the first step. And until that does happen, either by a legislator or by one of the major controlling players, then nothing is really going to move, in my opinion.
Interesting. So we're expecting to see more things coming. I mean, everyone's agreed that there's a lot more to come, and but people are, I guess, banding together to a certain degree more than everybody expected, which is positive. And I now want to get perspective on kind of what the implications and the impacts have been for GDPR on both the buy and the sell side. Sam, kind of sitting with your agency hat on, kind of what in terms of your data strategy is evolving, kind of how you're working with clients to make and work with them better, and how has it changed for you as an agency?
I think the 25th of May, what we're expecting is like end of world, to be honest. So we had like 6 months to prepare for the moment. We had all the safety measures in place to ensure, when if we did see the drops in spend, etc., we had like different strategies move into. But the reality really is, we did see a big drop on 25th, 26th. But I think that's more to do with the technical issue between the DSP and SSP and how they communicate, and some of the things have not been sort of like enforced properly. But post that, really from bottom, got to say that being a massive impact. That's what we were expecting from this. A few reasons behind it, like the spectrum really. One thing you've got to remember is from the buy side, the supply is way bigger than the demand really. From inventory point of view, from data point of view, unless we're talking about more niche audiences or more niche inventory. So it's quite hard to actually see the impact being surfaced properly from buy side. So from what we see, we did see pockets of audiences there. We did see volume being impacted, but overall we had no issue really getting with the budget or hitting the target our client was after really. But we did see some sort of like the changes in the marketplace. For example, we saw some SSP a bigger market share during the process, or we saw some DSP getting a better market share as well because of some of policy in place or version that have in place, or the SSP passing on the string. All those have some sort of impact. Well, from a client's point of view, they've seen a massive drop, drop in their spend and volume they're seeing. But some clients did take that in their hands in terms of posting the the sort of like sensitive five you made, like from remarketing point of view, just sort of like take time to reassess their strategy, and that would solve the one biggest sort of like behavior change we've seen during the process is the client and brand really pay attention to what they're doing from funding point of view, to see what they're doing on a data point of view. And I think that was probably the biggest change we see from the brand side of it.
Excellent, thank you, Sam. And Nicola, I want your perspective on this as well. Do you think, in kind of your work with advertisers, that the way that they are looking at data, has it made them want to get more control over their data and have a better understanding of being used, and how are you seeing this evolution? And do you think that it's down to GDPR, or is GDPR just one factor that's causing these changes?
Yeah, thank you. So as we said earlier, GDPR is just the driver of change. From a market perspective, marketer goals haven't changed, but stakes have increased. So marketers still want to reach and measure audience efficiently, ultimately. I have before, like CMOs are under pressure. That's true. That's also what we hear from our partners. And the marketers have started to redefine how they measure and find inefficiencies in a privacy safe approach. So from a Google perspective, we are definitely in a phase where we're listening, over-listening to partners, because we want to understand their challenges and take their feedback into account to drive our future product development to meet with this new landscape.
Excellent, thank you. And Andrew, I want your perspective on kind of what this impacts the sell side. I mean, there's a lot of talk around, it's a bit loaded to ask who the winners and losers of GDPR, but a lot of people say, the winners of GDPR have been GDPR consultants. Do you think that's the case? I mean, Tom mentioned earlier that publishers have done very well out of this. Do you think that the sell side has been a very positive impact on GDPR?
I don't think they've yet. I think there was a sort of a massive rush and a lot of GDPR consultants coming in and pleased to advise on different CMPs. And I think there's a lot of confusion for all of the publishers in the 6 months and especially in the 6 weeks before May 25th. And even now, they don't have a standard response to what this should be. I mean, technically, if you're going to do exactly what the legislator wants, you need to be in place, and you need to know about what kind of data you're requesting and what you're using it for. We're noticing that our whole the European traffic, only about 40% of it is a functioning CP, a CMP, and a further kind of 20 or so % have a non-functioning CP, CMPs, right? Which means about 30 publishers haven't even implemented one. And these numbers vary massively by market. The German market has the least CMPs in place, and the UK one is the one that has the most. However, when you look at the data, what comes actually has a consent flag in there. About 95% of the traffic that's coming through from UK publishers has got consent. When you look at the implementation, just a very large version of the original cookie banner with a big green button, encourages consumers just to click on it without necessarily digging into the details. So from an SSP point of view, I think they've from a publisher point of view, sorry, they've had a lot of stress of actually having to be able to make sure that their inventory is viable, and a lot of them have actually made a conscious decision not to do this because they believe they're in their market, and the ones that have realized that it doesn't actually make that much of a difference at this stage to whether the DSPs are buying them or not. So a lot of the ones that I was paying back to see who gets their knuckles wrapped first and how that's actually going to affect before they take that final step to implementing a functioning CMP, and only selling on consented data with properly legislated consent request. And I think when that does happen, then the publishers will be in a much better space, because any consented more.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So there's obviously, I mean, we'll get more onto kind of the depends very much later on kind of what that's doing to publishers. But I mean, you are there. I'm also interested to understand kind of, you know, where opportunities. I mean, we talk a lot about doom and gloom GDPR. Also, you know, has it really had the impact? Where are the opportunities? Kind of how can marketers actually use GDPR to their advantage and embrace it as a way of, obviously, Nicola, you talked already about kind of the way they can better use data and control over areas can marketers take advantage of GDPR and require them to do?
Sure. So let's start again from the user. I think the major opportunity for marketers today, explaining to their consumers on their website why there is a fair value of.
Okay, apologies if the sound cuts out. We are Programmatic, so hopefully you can hear Nicola. Continue.
Yeah. Sure. I was saying opportunity for marketers to explain and establish a conversation with the user, starting from their website, informing, educating, trying to address the transparency point of GDPR, but also try to do that in a simple way. Okay? I think the opportunity is establishing a fair trade of value for which consumers understand why benefit if they accept to share some data with companies. So I would start from definitely from that. This is an opportunity also for brands to generally like stand up, you know, up level their relationship, and not necessarily that will come with a high burden. We need also to consider technology is the backbone, you know, of the development of this. So as personalization or the use of creatives will continue to develop. If we think we were where we were 5 years back, like technologies has brought a lot of innovation, and it's therefore a keep also to the regulation, but again the user expectations in general are asking. So yes, like marketers are starting to ask themselves some questions. Not necessarily they are new questions. So how to keep their first-party data, how to connect offline data to online data. Those are not new questions, but they probably become more critical in this moment to adapt to this landscape.
Very good point.
That's just an example.
Yeah, and Sam, what's your perspective on this? Do you think it's not plans to be more innovative?
Definitely. I think what Nicola alluded to earlier is from brand side and from the programmatic side of it. I think one of the challenges we used to have is how much attention we're getting from the general marketing point of view. I think GDPR really presented a very good opportunity to sort of draw attention from say, okay, this is quite important, we need to pay more attention to it, and that creates an opportunity to, I think just that attention alone, having more buy-in from the brand, from the advertiser side of it, to know, becoming a question what they're currently doing. I think that alone, that behavior and mentality change would be probably the biggest in what we're going to see in the next probably 1 or 2 years to come.
And if I can add one point I didn't mention, it's about collaboration. So it's not just collaboration within the industry. I think within a marketer organization, the success might come easier, you know, if different set of skills, from analytical skills, creative skill, traditional marketing skill, as I said earlier, they can come together in this moment and help the organization.
And you took the words right out of my mouth. Thing. Do you think that it's actually helping to eliminate, firstly, within the marketing organization, within teams that maybe didn't actually before, but also have you found that it's made your relationship with your clients, Sam, stronger?
Definitely. Well, at least I think like more and more clients from sort of like beyond the programmatic display historically are asking more of these questions like, okay, what are we doing from their point of view on programmatic? I think that alone, again, just you can see the collaboration sort of like happening from the client wanting to ask more and wanting to work with the agencies to help them facilitate the process, or it's a bit easier for them. I think just all in all, again, what Nicola alluded to, that a change in perception and mentality and the buying from brand side probably presents the biggest opportunity.
Interesting. I want to talk about kind of the impact that GDPR has potentially had on certain types of ad formats, creativity, how it's affected rich media, and if that we're starting to talk a lot more about semantics and contextual targeting. And I want to understand if we're starting to see a lot more of that coming forward, if brands are specifically asking for that, or if there's a kind of push from the publisher side of things that they are starting to kind of engage in more different types of formats that enable them to kind of not have to rely so much on the likes of third-party data. Andrew, what's your perspective on this and kind of how it's affected the different ad formats?
We're definitely seeing a lot more requests from brands to target in different ways. So keyword targeting in the context of the page is going up. We're seeing a lot of people really looking at targeting what the audience is doing and what their current behavior is, and really use the format to be able to bring on and have the context of where a consumer is and what they're doing at that particular time, rather than just specifically targeting third-party data that identifies the profile of the user. There is a lot more contextual and that kind of targeting.
So it's interesting kind of talking about context and where how that differs from market to market. Talking about context and how that differs from market to market within Europe. I was in Germany last week, and actually they're crying out for third-party data. I think that would be completely the opposite. Looking much more at first-party data and kind of how they can broker more second-party relationships, but actually no, they still really want third-party data. How is that changing, and what does that mean kind of from European perspective, and how are we seeing? I mean, Sam, are you talking all about context now, or are you still finding that third-party data is king?
I think third-party data will always have its place, really, because you need a scalability. You just need that skill in this marketplace to go beyond the data you have from first-party point of view, or beyond the contextual targeting point of view. So you will have a place in that. I think you may see some limitation in different markets just because of like big data providers have limited skill in certain markets. That's just the nature. But I think if we put first-party data aside, that'll be a combination of contextual data as well as the audience data. It will be the combination of the two. That's what we'll see more of it, and also especially when it comes to format or devices, for example, when it comes to mobile, given the nature of mobile from tracking, from data point of view, contextual will obviously be a big part, probably will continue to grow. And also, like, it's not only GDPR, there's a wider impact when it comes to likes of ITP or tracking, the nature of it, like just add more weight to the increasing demand of certain type of content, and as well as the given regulation in place. And so we're expecting to see more of such sort of like strategy on contextual side of it. We're limited to scale contextual targeting sort of present to us, really. So audience targeting always have just how we can have with that kind of data, really.
So it's increasing, but it's still going to always pay in a comparison to target your audience effectively using third-party data.
Yeah, I think in short, the short answer is it's very hard to say, because it all depends on where the market is moving, and then how fast we see a growth of maybe how relevant content you are able to tap into, or how much of limitation you'll be facing up to when it comes to audience targeting. So it's very hard to say at this stage, but we're expecting that the demand of visiting will grow, but the supply of it from data point of view, we'll have to wait and see.
Interesting. And we are running swiftly out of time, but I want to kind of touch, Thomas, on the IAB Europe Transparency Consent Framework earlier, and Oliver talked about it more in his industry. And
I think it's all in the title, really, transparency and consent. So why transparency? Well, it's principle. It's not completely new, but it's there, and that means for publishers that they have to be fully as to what's happening with the user's data, where it's going, who's going to get access to it, and to do what. And I think the framework facilitates because you get that information by, are able to the vendors they want to work with, so they know where the data is going, and they know for which purposes the data is going to be used. And so once they have that information, they can then pass it on to the users and meet the transparency requirement. Consent. So why consent? It's also because the GDPR says that you need places to process lawfully. Consent is just one of 6 legal bases that exist, but it's the most talked about. And when you rely on consent as a vendor, as an SSP or DSP, and you don't have a direct relationship with the user, you need to know that you got the consent that you're after to process the data. And the framework brings to the table a solution, a technical solution, to pass on the consent information through the chain so that each vendor, each DSP involved in a transaction, know whether they have the right legal basis, have the consent in the first place to process the personal information lawfully. And more importantly, I think they have the ability to track it, to keep track of that, so that if a regulator shows up, you're going to be able to say, for this specific impression, I had, a legal basis, personal information.
Interesting. And Nicola, your perspective on the consent transparency. Can't be denied that there are a lot of questions being asked about kind of what Google's relationship was with the framework back in sort of around. So
again, how we have approached the transparency and consent framework today. So from a Google perspective, we are eager for an industry-wide way to communicate between parties. The TCF is exactly addressing these, and this is also consistent with a long history of industry-wide initiatives we have been supported, like Coalition for Better Ads, for example, or Ads. So what we have been doing in the past few months, working closely with IAB Europe to ensure that our products will be interoperable within the TCF. It includes some consideration about how such a large-scale suite of products can interoperate. And it requires some care in the integration, also in the interest of publisher, partners, advertiser working with us. With large progresses, and recently we also have joined the steering group of the TCF, which is addressing fundamental challenges in order to successfully evolve the framework. So this discussion is continuing, and we will more detailed soon in conjunction with IAB.
Thank you, Nicola. Before it's probably best to leave it there, but I want to say thank you very much to my panelists, Andrew, Nicola, Thomas, and Sam, and hopefully, despite the technical, you get something out of that discussion.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I think, again, there was meant to be some remarks. I guess the only remarks we're going to leave you with today is that slides and heavily edited presentation is going to be on the IAB Europe site in the next coming days. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Technology has failed us today, maybe a little bit. Programmatic will we're very, very today. Programmatic as automation is only here to stay. New channels, new mediums are going to open up to automation. As an industry, we're working together probably more than we've ever worked before. Brighter times for programmatic than for Wi-Fi connections. Thank you very much.